Well, hello everyone, it's Kari back again with a couple of cards to share. I'm going to be sharing this layering stencil from Miss Ink Stamps. This is called Latte Art, and let me show you all the layers. There are 5 different layers and they're each marked with a number so you can tell which layer is which, and they are beautiful. Look at this layer here, and the top decorative layer just tops it all off, and it's gorgeous. I'm going to make 2 different cards using these stencils today so you can see the difference. So let me put them in order here. But I also wanted to share this other stencil that Miss Ink has, and it is a kind of an L shape here to help you line up your layering stencils. So if you don't have a system that you use already, this is a really great way to line those up. So I taped that L shaped stencil down, and now I'm going to put my cardstock down. I'm starting with some Desert Storm cardstock here. That is kind of a craft colored cardstock. And I did not line that up with the L-shaped stencil because the top stencils are what I want to line up. Now to make sure that stays in place, I'm just going to tape that right there to that stencil. And this is going to help me make sure each layer is lined up the exact same every time so I don't have to eyeball it. They'll go right there in that corner L. I'm starting out with some Distress Oxide ink, and this is Vintage Photo. I really love how oxide inks look on a craft cardstock, so that's why I'm using it, and they also show up a little bit better than dye inks. So I'm going to be using oxides all on this first card here. Now I'm going to tape down that second layer, and I've chosen a couple of different blues. I have here the Stormy Sky and Faded Jeans, and I am going to switch them around. I'm starting with a couple of these cups here in that first shade of lighter blue, and then I will switch to the darker blue and color up the rest of the cups. Now you can do this in any colors you want. I thought I would stick to blues on this first card. The next card I'm going to bring in some much brighter colors. So you'll see how beautiful this stencil looks in a variety of colors. So once I have that all finished, I'll bring in the third stencil, and look at that. It's turning out really great. The third stencil are the saucers now, and so I'll tape that down, and you can see I tape it in a couple places now just to make sure that those stay right where they should. And now I'm going to switch off those colors. So the ones where I started with the cups in the lighter shade, I'm now going to do the saucers in the darker shade, and vice versa. So I'm just peeking and double checking. And now I'll go in with that lighter shade on the ones where I did the darker cups. So just switching off here. This is very simple and easy to do. I did find that sometimes I wanted to hold down that center portion of this stencil. It may benefit you to use some repositionable adhesive on the back, like a pixie spray or some kind of temporary adhesive like that for this particular stencil, because I did find that those cups moved just a tiny bit there. But look, it turned out great anyway. And now for this layer here, I'm going to take some white pigment ink and ink it over all of those brown layers that I did at the beginning. Here's a pro tip. If you're going to do this over a darker color, you'll find that your brush and your ink pad might start turning that shade of brown. So I recommend that you take your ink pad and you use an acrylic block to get some of that ink out, and then dip your brush in the ink pad, or I'm sorry, on the ink that you put on the acrylic block, and then you're less likely to change that white, beautiful white ink pad to a darker color. Because the brown Vintage Photo did come off a little bit on my pigment white ink. Now it's time for this last layer, which is a beautiful decorative layer, and I'm going to go in with some Uncharted Mariner and use that on all of the colors. So you'll see it's a darker shade. I moved to a larger brush here because I decided to use the same color on all of these top layers. So that made it a little faster, a little bit easier. And I'll ink over all of those, and here's the reveal now. Look at that. Such a beautiful design. Now I'm going to finish this off by using some of these stamps from the caffeinated stamp set from Missing Stamps. There are a few coffee beans in there, and there's a really great sentiment that says, all I need is a little caffeine and a lot of crafting. I'm going to take one of the coffee beans, and I've got some Memento ink here in, I think this is Toffee. It's a lighter brown shade. And I'm going to just stamp those coffee beans all over the background. I want to make sure I leave room for my sentiment, so I place my sentiment there to make sure I don't stamp too much behind it and make it a little too crazy busy. So I'll just take that and stamp them here and there. It creates a really fun background for this card. And now I can stamp down the sentiment. I'm going to white heat emboss it, so I want to make sure that this panel is fully dry before I use any embossing powder. And I'll test that to make sure the embossing powder doesn't stick, but here, look, it did stick to some spots. So that will create a really messy looking sentiment. So I put that back into the jar, and I dried this off a little more using my heat tool, allowed that to sit for a little bit, made sure all that embossing powder was off first. And now that it's fully dry, I can go ahead and do my embossing. So I've got an embossing buddy here. I've got some embossing ink, so I'm using some sticky ink, and then I'll take some white embossing powder in a detail embossing powder and emboss that sentiment right over the top. I still love the magic of watching the embossing powder melt. That's how I fell in love with stamping in the first place. So now I've also created a small, thin blue frame around the edge and left enough for a white frame around the whole thing as well. I finished it off with some clear bubble embellishments, and that's our first card today. Now I'm going to create a much more colorful card. I've got a couple different shades of ink in 3 colors. So I have pink, orange, and yellow, a dark and a light of each. And this time I thought it would be fun to create more of a tea look. So like these would be teacups in this instance. So I started with a little bit of antique linen distress ink for the tea. And now I'm going to use the lighter shade of pink for those cups. And I'm going to do this in rows. So the top row will be pink, the center row will be orange, and the final third row will be yellow. So that's why I have these 3 shades. Now you can do these in any colors you want. You can alternate them, you can diagonally color them diagonally, whatever you want to do. I just thought it would be fun in rows. Now I did get a little bit of orange in the bottom yellow layer there, so I'm going to just bring a little more of that orange ink down. So I picked a little bit up and brought it down. So it'll be a little darker yellow cup, and that's fine. You could also tape that off if you wanted to. Now I'm going to use the darker shade on the saucers of each color. So I'll go in the top one with the pink. And again, I did have to hold the center piece of each of those cups. So next time I may use some pixie spray for this layer. For the orange, I learned my lesson. I didn't want to get that down into the yellow saucers. So I did take a little bit of light low tack tape and tape off the yellow. And that really did help to preserve the yellow color. If I haven't mentioned it before, I'll say it again. I adore layering stencils because of the brilliant design that you get at the end. Now for this piece, I thought I would just take a couple of those hearts and use the same color as the cup to color them. And I thought that was really fun to have just a little heart in the middle of each of the teacups. I know it doesn't make a lot of sense, but it was for decorative purposes, and I thought it was just beautiful. So you can use whichever heart you want, whichever one you love the most. This one really was my favorite right here, this one that I used on the orange. So I decided to use that on all of the oranges, and I used it on a pink as well, I believe. So I just picked my favorite ones and inked those up in the colors. Really fun for a design look as well. For the last layer, I thought it would be fun to bring in some lunar paste. So I've got some gold paste here, and you can use anything you want for the top layer. I just thought the gold really sang to me. So I'm really quickly taking my Nuva spatula here, which is a little bit pliable, I guess I want to say. So it was really easy to get into all the little tiny designs and make sure I got most of that covered. And it was also pretty quick. But once you do get this covered, you want to wash your stencil pretty quick and your utensils. So I took this to my sink and washed it off really quickly. Look at that shine you get. So pretty. So I love using a different idea for the layers. Now, of course, I colored up Alice for this set. I thought this went really well with the Alice Tea Party set. I've got Alice sitting in her chair. You can see I have part of the table already there on my panel. And is it freaking anyone else out that there's a Copic marker open on my panel right there? Yeah, I move that pretty soon here, I do. I use the coordinating dies to cut out Alice and a cupcake and the layered teacups there. And I'm going to put those on with some foam adhesive. But first I'm just going to lay them out and make sure I like the design. And I'm going to use the sentiment in that tea party set that says, would you like an adventure now or shall we have tea first? And I just love that sentiment. I think it's perfect for a lot of occasions. I'm going to heat emboss this as well, so I make sure not to smudge that sentiment. So I'm using some VersaFine Onyx black ink and some clear embossing powder for this, and that will just lock that ink in so it won't be smeared. And now I'm going to take these layering tags from Miss Ink Stamps, and I'm using this one here, but I'm going to cut it partially and cut it down to make the size of tag that I want. So you can see that it's a little long here, but I'm going to take the end here, reposition it on that tag, and cut off that end. So make sure to line that up. I'll tape that down, run just that part through the die cutting machine, and it'll cut that end off so it'll make a shorter tag just perfect to fit my card. Now I love this tag set because it also has a couple different options for tag reinforcers, and I'm going to use this one on that extra piece that we just cut off the end of the tag. And then I'll use some of that same pink ink that we used on the first layer to color the tag reinforcer. So that's going to bring some of that pink right back in to the tag, and it's really, really cute. I used some liquid adhesive. Now look, this also has a fold line in the center, so you can fold that over and then just go ahead and glue that down with a little liquid adhesive. And now I'll put that right over the top. And I'm just going to hold that down with my reverse tweezers while it dries. I found some seam binding that was the perfect Alice blue, so I decided to use that on this tag. I did not expect to be putting a ribbon or seam binding or a bow or anything on this tag, but it just worked out that way. So again, you can use anything you want for this. This seam binding just worked out perfectly. And I still love a good seam binding. If you don't have the right color, you could color your own if you have some white ribbon or seam binding. So you could use some of your re-inkers to color it. You could use some of your distress sprays, anything you have to color your ribbon. Now I'll go ahead and place things down where I want them. I'm using foam tape once again, and then just putting a little bit of a shadow beneath her with some gray Copic marker. I know it's a little hard to see in the video. And then I'll add the teacups and the cupcake, and then again we'll add down the tag. And I am going to make sure that that ribbon stays exactly in the places that I want them. So I'm using a mini glue dot in the center behind the bow and behind each of the little loops, so they're not going to go anywhere. And you can see I kind of twisted around that bottom tail of the seam binding. So this tag, or I'm sorry, this ribbon will stay in place. Now this may be a card to give to someone personally, maybe not go through the mail. It can also look cute inside a box. But there is our card with that beautiful gold shining, and I just love Alice, of course, on on a lot of my cards. You probably noticed. So here's a look at the first card that we created on the craft cardstock, just using the layering stencil and a sentiment. And here I added a variety of colors and Alice. I hope you enjoyed this video today. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, and I'll be back soon to share more cards. Bye-bye.